Well, in a week in which the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and I have exchanged some harsh words, he will no doubt be relieved to learn that this is highly unlikely to happen this morning, because I do recognise that practically everything he had to say today, basically it was common sense and was very much in line with what he said at the conference run by the Law Society that he and I attended some weeks ago. Now, Scotland has been well served by its legal profession, and any debate with regard to its regulation has got to be against that background. However, as has already been said by the Cabinet Secretary and by Paul Martin, that does not mean that change is not necessary. And an examination of the current format of the Scottish legal profession is quite interesting, but at the same time demonstrates why such change may be necessary. There are 1,247 legal firms practising in Scotland at the moment, and I was quite astonished to discover that of those, 46% are in fact sole practitioners. The rest vary from 2 partners to the mega-sized operations, sometimes with partnerships extending 80 in number. The private legal profession contributes £1.2 billion to the Scottish economy. And obviously, against that background, we have got to be very careful at what we are doing, because under no circumstances do we either wish to prejudice that amount, and hopefully, if we play our cards right on this particular issue, and I'm sure that the legal profession will certainly be keen to go down this route, we could greatly expand upon this £1.2 billion and bring in much-needed resources from elsewhere. So, with every threat, there is an opportunity. Mr Whitton.
David Whitton.
Thank you very much, Mr Aitken. Are you actually saying then, OK, the legal profession contributes £1.2 billion to the Scottish economy, but are you saying then that the fee should be going up instead of finding some way to try and make law more affordable?
No, Mr Whitton, you'll be relieved to learn that basically what I'm saying, and as a good PR man, Mr Whitton will realise this, that we should be expanding the market, bringing in more business. That does not necessarily mean that the per capita fee note would actually increase, but if we have a bigger volume of customers, then clearly more money will come in, and I'm sure that is something that Mr Whitton would applaud. So we have a great variety within the Scottish legal profession. The small high street solicitor in a country town, as opposed to the large, almost multinational conglomerate that we have in the cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow. So against that background, we do need to look and see in which way this requires to change. And to do that, I think possibly what we should also do is to look and see what we expect of our legal profession. First of all, we naturally expect integrity. Secondly, they should always be acting in the interests of the client. Confidentiality is vital, and they should always be available. And any alternative business structure that may be put in force cannot go away from these basic tenets, and I'm sure no one would wish that to be the case. And I'd be just a little bit worried, and of course I do accept that it's early days yet in this particular debate, that if we are going to have alternative business structures that would enable non-legal practitioners to play a role in building firms, in legal firms, then at some stage some of these tenets might be not consistent with those which others might wish to bring in, particularly bearing in mind the issue of confidentiality. And that is something that we will have to look at. Now, to some extent, our discussions today have been predicated by the fact that the UK Legal Services Bill has gone through the parliamentary process down south. Now, when you examine that bill, like every other piece of legislation, there are parts that are eminently sensible, there are others that are just a little bit more questionable, but in general terms, it was not a bad piece of legislation, and we would have broadly welcomed that down here, as indeed we would broadly welcome up here changes that may come about. But, whilst we do recognise that the increased flexibility that that bill does allow is of benefit, the downside was that the Legal Services Board is down south appointed by the Lord Chancellor as an oversight regulator, and this would obviously put me on inquiry as to whether or not, if we were to implement a similar situation here, obviously with another august body other than the Lord Chancellor whether or not there might be some interference with the independence of the legal profession, and that is something that clearly we would have to oppose. Now, change, when it is imposed upon one, is obviously hard to take, but change in this respect is necessary. And I think what has been particularly encouraging has been the way in which the Scottish legal profession has recognised that such changes are necessary, and whilst it is not at this stage committed itself to any specific direction, and the matter is one for consultation, I think that they are due considerable praise for the way in which they have adapted. They have made the virtue of a necessity to proceed along the lines that I think the Parliament would wish them to do, and that is they are to be congratulated on it. But if some of their membership think that there are threats, I would stress the opportunities, and the opportunities of attracting further business from previously untapped markets. Scottish lawyers have an excellent reputation. Members of the Law Society, such as Douglas Mill, have contributed significantly to the International Association of Law Chief Executives. That is indicative of the way in which Scots lawyers are regarded elsewhere, and other distinguished members of the Law Society staff have themselves played an international role, and that is to be encouraged, and as I say, is a recognition of the status of the Scottish legal profession. So I have little fears that as the process here continues, that there will be other than a very genuine attempt to recognise the changing business world in which we all operate, not just the legal profession, and that what will emerge at the end of the day will be something which will be eminently sensible and which would be totally acceptable to this Parliament. It is, as I say, early days. We do require to think everything through. We certainly do not wish to rock a particularly stable boat, which has, as I say, served Scotland very well over generations and indeed centuries. But alternative business structures have got to be looked at. They have got to be looked at clearly. Sometimes people out there feel that there is a great duplication in the services which can be provided. In the purchase of a house, for example, obviously a lawyer is necessary, obviously a surveyor is necessary. Sometimes a financial advisor to fix the mortgage and the financial payments that will have to be made is also necessary. And the public are asking, why can this not be done under one roof? And it's a very difficult question to answer satisfactorily. And we have to look at the way in which alternative business structures can, to some extent, resolve that public disquiet, if not unease, at the way in which they feel that sometimes they're being asked to pay a fee to 3 or 4 particular businesses, whereby, if there was, it could all be done under the one roof, it would be cheaper, and at the end of the day would provide a more cohesive service. So that is the sort of thing that we do have to look at. I'm confident that this debate has gone the way in which it should. I think there is a unanimous will throughout the Chamber that whatever arrives at the end of the day will be something that will be acceptable to the people of Scotland, to those who work within the legal profession, and to the differing political approaches that this Parliament inevitably from time to time takes. But I do not think, Presiding Officer, that there is anything in this particular business before us today that we need to divide the House.